Hey, what's going on? And welcome back to the Stepping Up Entrepreneur Podcast. Thomas Keenan, your host. And today I've got Sarah Snyder with us. And Sarah's got a hell of a story. Sarah was introduced to me by the illustrious Brianne Adams, and most of you guys know has been on the podcast here as a team member and just one of my favorite humans on the planet. And when Bree says, "Hey, you should probably consider talking about this to this person about coming on the show and whatnot," you kind of just shut up and say, "Okay, cool." Like when you have people in your circle who you trust and you respect, you just take their word for it and say, "All right, let's just have at it." And with that being said, Sarah, I mean, like you and I hopped in here, right? Let's just full transparency. We don't know each other from a hole in the wall.
Do not.
You came through the process. You filled out the application to come on the show. You're here, which obviously means you were approved, which is cool. And we kind of just had a brief conversation before, a little bit of background, a little bit of, I don't know, casual. Oh yeah, I know someone in your area, kind of deal with like rapport building, as if we're on a I don't know, a networking intimate little networking event, or someone just introduces us at some kind of event or whatnot. So with that being said, I'm grateful to have you here, and I want to kind of dive in and learn a little bit more about you and what you're doing and how you help people.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm really glad that we connected us. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, awesome. So you're in Florida right now. Have you always been in Florida?
I have not always been in Florida.
Right, cool.
I grew up in Ohio. I lived in Texas for a really long time, so I'm familiar a little bit with your area. And then at one point I took off, decided I wanted to be a digital nomad, and I took off and lived in Aruba for a while, lived in Costa Rica for a while. And I came back to the U.S. I was just going to get some supplies, that doing business meetings. I bounced around the U.S. and felt like God wanted me here in Florida. So I ended up staying here in Florida rather than going to the next country.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So how long did the digital nomad stuff last, and what lessons did you learn while doing it?
It lasted about 9 months. It was October of 2020 when I took off from Texas and was like, I'm just gonna go. And I learned a lot about the importance of community, because I lived completely by myself. And also it was during the pandemic, right? So even though I made lots of local friends in the local community, there were not a lot of tourists in the countries I was in, and people weren't hugging, people weren't shaking hands, people weren't doing that kind of stuff. And so I became even more almost self-reliant, and even more like, I need to figure this out. But I saw beauty in the world that was absolutely incredible. And like I said, the local people in the local countries were absolutely amazing. And just, I made some phenomenal friendships doing that. Yeah. And then, but I realized during that at some point you do need to accept community, whether that's in business, whether that's a church, whether that's your personal life. And so that was a big growth. That's been a big growth lesson for me.
Yeah, community is a really big, important thing. And I don't think people realize it until they either lose it or they go hibernate intentionally for a little while, right? Yeah. It's just the way my personality is. And Brie will tell you the same thing, because she's the same way to an extent. Like we can both be these energetic, outgoing individuals for a short burst of time. And after that, I've got to go hide from people, like literally go away, hide, and like hide behind my computer, or go, just sit and do nothing for a little while and kind of recharge. And that also gets, just as it gets old when you're around too much people and they're sucking your energy dry, it also gets really old being home alone and almost, I don't know, putting up the walls and kind of just hiding in your little cave. Right. Yeah. And you got to go and you got to recharge. And oftentimes that community is the thing that does it for you. It's one of the things that's so important with the mastermind that we have, because once a quarter, everyone's coming into town and meeting face to face. Once a month, we get on a Zoom call, which was actually last night we did that. And it allows you to get in front of your community. And when something like the pandemic comes in and says, oh, by the way, you can't community anymore, it really screws things up. Yeah. It's wild. So many people had such like vastly different experiences through the 2020 season. For me personally, it was life-altering decisions to basically uproot my family and move from New York to Dallas in the middle of COVID. And everyone's like, "You're crazy." And I said, "Yeah, I know, but it's cool because I want to do it."
Yeah.
I did it anyway. So that's wild. All right. So career-wise, let's touch on a career for a little bit here, and then kind of get into your story and how that evolved and how you got into it. Sure. You got your own business, and your specialty is PR. You get people on podcasts, get people into magazines and whatnot. How did that come about? Like, how'd you get into it?
So I'm actually licensed as a professional counselor in the state of Texas.
Okay.
And I did so that's what I went to school for. That's what my master's degree is in. I did that for years and years, but I was not your typical traditional counselor where you come meet once a week in an office. I was running behavioral units at residential treatment centers for kids with significant trauma who had behavioral issues. I was living in group homes with kids who were moved from their homes by CPS who couldn't be successful in a foster home, and so they had to go to a group home so that we could help them get to a point where they could be successful in foster care. I was working with victims of domestic violence. I was working with people who were in immediate psychiatric crisis in the community. So we would sometimes get phone calls, and these are all different things I did throughout my career, right? But sometimes we would get phone calls and people would say, hey, my friend's suicidal. Can you go check on them? And we would literally go out and knock on a stranger's door and say, hey, we got this anonymous phone call that you're not doing so hot. Can we come in and talk?
Yeah.
And then for a while too, I worked with police and EMS, did crisis co-response. So the police would go out, or we would go out and meet them there. Sometimes we'd ride with them, people dancing on the ledges of buildings, or people just saying, hey, like, hearing, seeing things, or not, whatever. Sometimes they were just depressed and dealing with tons of trauma. Right. And having to go in and help figure out what resources can we give you? How can we mitigate this problem in the moment? Is there a way to avert jail? Is that really the best option? Yeah. So all that to say, like, eventually I got to this point where that was what I did for all through college, all after college, years and years of that. And I loved the clients, especially the kids. I love the population, but there is so much politics. There is so much red tape. There is so much insurance. Like, it is insane. And so that's what eventually I got burnt out. I didn't want to do the politics and the insurance anymore. So I had a point about 6 or 7 years ago. I actually texted, emailed, Facebook messaged about 100, 150 people that I knew that I respected. And the message was something like, hey, this is why I respect you. This is my current skill set. And I think about doing something different with my life. What would you suggest based on what you know about life and your expertise and whatever? And I got a lot of really cool responses from that. Some people were like, you should do real estate. Some people were like, you should do car sales. Some people were like, you should just continue to be a counselor, but work with in a different environment, right? And so I got tons of cool feedback on that. Yeah. And one woman owned the gym that I worked out at, which is why I reached out to her, because she owned the gym. She was a female. She was an entrepreneur. I really looked up to her. And she said, well, I own the gym, but she said, I also own a public relations firm. And she was like, you're smart. She said, I can teach you. I can train you. Come work for me. And so I am, to this day, very grateful and indebted to her, right, for taking a chance on me. And so I did that, and I went and worked for her for a while, and then eventually ended up doing my own thing. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. All right. So talk to me about the gym.
Talk to me about the gym?
Yeah. Because I literally just came home from the gym. It's something that I didn't start doing until much later in life, because I finally got sick and tired of just feeling terrible. And I think it was 2018 is when I started really focusing on me. I was doing all this work to make my business better. And the next step of the process of this thing we call self-development was like, okay, cool. I did some work to get the business better, but I'm never going to get the business any better if I don't go fix me.
Yep.
So part of fixing me, I was, looking in the mirror and I'm like, I don't like what I see. And this is not me. I always grew up. I was an athletic guy as a kid growing up, playing sports and whatnot. And here I am, in my, I guess I was 38 at the time, so almost 40. And I was like, I'm not happy with what's going on. Like, I'm out of breath tying my shoes, and I have no energy to play with my kids. Like, I need to go address this. So I started on that path. But what was it for you that got you into the gym? Because you've got some cool stuff you did there.
I was probably sitting, I'm 5'6". I was probably sitting about 350 pounds or so. And this is many years ago. And I was really just, not happy with it, right? And so I had always wanted to play football. And so playing football was not an option for me as a girl. And so I never had to play. And I found that there was a women's professional football team in the area there in Austin, the Austin Outlaws. And so I ended up being like, well, I wanted to go try it, right? And so I went and I tried and I started playing. I started on the offensive line. And so that was a great time in my life. But as I was doing that, I got more curious about women. And I was like, what else have women done? And I started Googling and researching, like, who's got the world's, heaviest deadlifts and who's got this and who's got that. And I came across a lady named Jill Mills, who was at the time the world's strongest woman. And she said, hey, like, I'm in San Antonio, which is about an hour and a half from Austin. She said, why don't you just come out to my ranch and meet me, and I'll walk you through some things and you can see if you like what I do or not. And so I went out there, and she's running through what's called strong woman competition. So that's the deadlift, that's pulling trucks, that's picking up atlas stones, that's doing walking with yolks on your back, all kinds of that kind of stuff, right? And the moment I was out there,
I'm familiar.
Yeah, the moment I was out there and I met her and I did it, I was like, I love this. Like, this is amazing. And so, and I'm very much an adrenaline junkie. And so it fit with my personality, it fit where I was at, and, that time in my life. And so I went fully into that. I ended up getting some sponsors, ended up getting ranked as one of the top 10 strongest women in the US through the strong woman competitions. And so that was a season of my life where, I just, that was that and work, man, were my two things. I was either at the gym or I was at work. And I loved it. I still love it.
Yeah. So let's get some stats here, just so people understand, like what kind of weight you were pushing, right? My assumption here is deadlifts. You're probably doing squats. You're probably doing push press or some form of it. So give me some of your PRs that you hit over the years.
So sadly now, compared to what the women are doing, it's peanuts. My deadlift was about 350, and so that's peanuts compared to what the women do now. But at the time,
350, so you're fine.
And so at the time, it's pretty good. But my favorite one was actually the yoke walk, and so that is where you put the big yoke across your back, you stand up with it, and you walk. And I got up to 600 pounds on that, so I could put 600 pounds on it, walk across the gym, and walk back. Love that. I love the farmers. I don't remember what I did in the farmers. That was my other one that I loved. And then the trucks. They were the big dually trucks, right? We'd strap up to those and put a harness on and essentially run with those, pulling those, for time. And so those were the things that atlas stone was about 300 or so I could pick up and put up over a bar. So yeah, so it was fun.
Yeah.
It's nice too, because it's 60 seconds and you amp up for the event. And sometimes for some of the competitions, they won't tell you the events ahead of time.
Yes.
And so you just have to be prepared for anything. And other times, right, a little bit for that, so you kind of train around it. Yeah. But you really just have to be ready to go. And then you're warming up, you got your 60 seconds, and then you just crushed. And then it's you try and recoup before the next 60-second event. So yeah.
It's cool. The gym that I work at, a lot of guys there are basically competing and going into a lot of strongman stuff. The cool thing I found about it too is, there's because you think strongman and you start thinking the big name guys like Eddie Hall and these just massive giant humans. I'm not a small human by no stretch of imagination, right? I'm 6'4" right now. Realistically, I'm 270, 275. I met Half Thor, the mountain.
Oh, cool, yeah.
I stood next to that man and took a picture with him. And this he was lean because he was actually just getting ready to box, or he had just boxed Eddie Hall. And these are two of the strongest men in the world, right, at one point in time. And Half Thor is 6'9", and he's 340 pounds lean.
Yeah.
I'm standing next to this human, and I'm like, there is no way that I could compete with this on any platform whatsoever. Yeah, it's cool. I like it. I like it a lot. All right, so there's a lot of moving pieces here, right? Let's backtrack here a little bit, because you started doing work in the space, you're a licensed counselor here in Texas. You're helping all sorts of people out with some really traumatic shit that they had been going through at some point in time in their lives. What was the trigger that said to you, hey, go do this kind of stuff to help others?
So my own personal background, I was raised in a cult, and so I experienced a lot of abuse growing up. Those are sexual abuse is some of my earliest memories, right? And so that was what I lived in and lived through. And eventually I hit a point where I wanted to understand, I guess, what had happened to me and how to help myself heal.
Yeah.
But then I was also at this point in my life where I wanted to be able to help others too. And the empathy, like it's one of those things where like when you've been through something like that, you can sit with somebody. And so being able to sit with people when they're in their pain and sit with them in that. And then the brilliant thing for me is to see people's resiliency and see how they like work through the trauma that they've been through, work through the things they've been through, and then eventually, right, kind of, I guess, come out the other side.
Yeah.
And so that was really important. That was really important to me to be able to help other people who had, very recently come from things that I had come from.
Yeah, I get it. So parallel to that, it's definitely not the same thing. So I'll never say it is, but that to me is very similar to the version of my story, right? I didn't have any trauma. I think everyone has trauma in their lives, especially growing up, but everyone's version of trauma is different, right? I didn't have the trauma that you had going through childhood and whatnot. Okay. But as I got into the entrepreneurial journey, the struggle started to happen because business isn't as easy as everyone says it's going to be on Instagram.
Yeah, for sure.
Imagine that.
Yep.
So I started, I crashed and burned the first business, went back to someone else and worked for someone for a couple of years, got back on my feet, learned more about life, more about people, just how to be a better human kind of deal. Thanks, Jimmy Stavrinos, Speed World FX. He's still a good friend to this day, and he's the dude who helped me out in between there. Awesome. And then I went and started my second company. And 5 years into the second company is when I decided, okay, I got to go do something better here, right? Like we're doing business, things are good, but it can be better. What do I go do? And I went and started, joining masterminds and going and hiring coaches and doing the work needed to really build a business. And along the way, what wound up happening was people started to take notice in my industry, especially. So at the time I was in the GPS tracking industry. Others are like, hey, we never heard of you until like last week. I've kind of been on the scene for years, just kind of flying under the radar, which most of us who aren't like your traditional visionary or the extroverted people, like I don't want to be the center of attention. That's never been my goal, right? It was much easier and comfortable for me to fly under the radar. But the problem with that, if you're just flying under the radar, right, is if somebody doesn't know you, how do you finish the equation of know, like, and trust, which equals the sale?
Yep.
So somebody has to know you to determine if they like you and then to determine if they trust you, right? Okay, cool. So I understand this and I buy into it. So I start getting a little bit more vocal, start leveraging social media, start doing some PR stuff. I wind up writing my book, right? Go on podcast tours, similar to like what you're doing right here now. And okay, now the world is taking notice. Like the world in my little bubble is taking notice. And I got people who are reaching out to me who are like, hey, you're doing some cool things over there at your company. Do you think you can help me do that with mine?
It's awesome.
Okay, awesome. So yes, you were through the trauma and the struggle of the sexual abuse as a child. And yes, you can sit in the shit with your clients and help them through it because you understand it very deeply and intrinsically. Right. The same thing with me in business. I understand the struggles of being that small business owner, the entrepreneur, the one who's got to go into his personal savings account and withdraw money to cover payroll that day.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Like I've done that shit. Right. It's not fun. Yep. Okay. So I understand it on that deep intrinsic level. So it helps me help my clients much better here in what I do today. So pretty wild how it aligns there.
Yeah.
So the whole your childhood was jacked up, right? You had some trauma there and whatnot. At what point did you start to kind of realize like, hey, I've kind of been through some stuff and I need to go do some work on me to heal, fix, overcome the trauma, that kind of stuff?
It has been, I have done a lot of therapy on myself and a lot of personal development work on myself. Yeah. Probably over the last, since I was in freshman, sophomore in college. I mean, it's been, it's many, many years. Me trying different therapists, me trying different personal development groups, me trying different coaches and trauma specialists, and piecing it together. Right, everybody has their part that I'm grateful for, right, and helping me kind of walk through parts of that. Lots of reading. I read even today, right? I read all the time about growth and development in business, personal life, because I think, especially as an entrepreneur, if you're not careful and you're not willing to acknowledge some of the things that have happened to you, right, it will eventually at some point impact your business. And so one of the things that I talk to people about is, you know, you don't want to get stuck. You don't want to get stuck in the I'm a victim. That's not healthy. But you have to still be willing to sit, acknowledge that the bad stuff happened. If it's appropriate, grieve that, right? And deal with it. And then you can take the steps towards like, okay, like now what comes next? And so I had to do that for myself. I tended to get stuck in the, like, I'm a victim. And so I had to push hard into the, how can this be used for good? Like, I've acknowledged that this has happened. I have grieved that this has happened, you know, and sometimes things come up, maybe that impact me today, but how can I twist that and use that for good? And that's where it's really been the last, I would say 3 or 4 years. I ended up, you know, I for a long time was like, God doesn't exist. There's too much evil in the world. And I ended up 4 years ago, I accepted Christ. And that has made the biggest, most profound difference in my life. And it's given me a peace and an understanding and a forgiveness for people who did things to me. Like, there are biological relatives that I did not speak to for years. Who now I have a love for that I can't, it doesn't make sense. I can't explain it outside of God, right? And so, but I had to do a lot of that work along the way of working through pieces of that to get to this point. Yeah.
So I'm picking up a lot of forgiveness as well that had to come into play in order for you to move forward and grow.
You know, people, and the funny thing is, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny. People used to say that to me. They'd be like, Sarah, you need to forgive. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you don't have any idea of how extensive or how awful this was, right? And you're asking me to forgive? Like, are you kidding me? And people tell you that, oh, it's like holding poison and it's damaging you more than it is anybody else.
Yeah.
Oh, they used to make me so mad. I would be like, I don't want to, talk about this. And so I tried though, like, and I had coaches who were like, just go try and reconnect with your parents and then, or whoever, right? And I would try. And then I would fall apart, become depressed, like suicidal, and they'd be like, oh, well, this isn't good. Don't do that anymore, right? And so the people kept trying to do stuff like that, and I could never get there. And what happened was about 2 years ago, I actually prayed, and I just said, God, will you take the anger from me? Like that, just take the anger. That was all. That was my prayer. And from that, God has given me the gift of forgiveness for them to where we can go and I can sit at a table and have a dinner with them. And I tell people I have very, very healthy boundaries. I have very strong boundaries, right? This is the other thing I had to learn. And I think it applies to business too, right? Like, kind of like your core values. Like, what are your boundaries around your personal life? What are your boundaries around your business? And so I often tell people, if I invite you over to my house, when you steal something from my house, like, I'll forgive you, right? I'm going to find empathy. I'm going to try and figure out where you're coming from. I'm going to, all that, but I may not let you back into my house again, but that doesn't mean we can't go have coffee down the street, right? Like, I might have coffee with you down the street, but you're not going to come back into my house. And that's okay. That's my boundary now because you violated my boundary. You violated my trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that 100%. So what are some of the routine pieces that you've implemented? What are some of the daily routine pieces that you're doing now that have really truly helped you with the forgiveness part of things that's allowed you to continue to grow into the person you are today?
Oh, that's a good question. My circle. Yeah. That's good. I am careful about my inner circle, right? Yeah. Who I allow to, I have tons of friends. I love them. I think they're amazing, but I have a very core select group of people. And so that's part of, I would say, my daily routine. That's like, who am I interacting with the stuff, that deeply impacts me. I do pray, often, right? But as far as habits go, make sure I pray. I set up prayer time every morning and every evening. So that's important to me. And then I try very hard when I look at someone, even if it's a stranger, I try very hard to put myself in their shoes and, not for sympathy's sake, but for empathy's sake. And there's a difference between sympathy and empathy, right? Yeah. And I want to be empathetic. And so curiosity is really important to me. It's important to me to be curious about people. It's important to me to be curious about business. And obviously plays into my business too and how I run things. And so I want to be curious about the people who work for me, right? What's going on in your life? And so I would say those are trying to, like I said, watch my inner circle, pray, and then be curious about what's going on in the lives of others, rather than always taking it from I know what's going on, I know what's happening, because I don't unless you tell me. Right? That's what I'm talking
Yeah. Tightening up the inner circle's probably been the biggest key factor for me, but also one of the hardest things to do. I picked up on this a couple of years ago. I was doing some self-development, which is nothing new. I think, you get to a point in your life where you're going to go down this journey of self-development and you're going to continue doing it until you're not. And some people just stop and cool, that they're happy with where they are. And other people, and it sounds like us, we're just going to continue going until we get to that hard wall. And I don't sense that hard wall being anywhere fucking close to me, by the way. But I came across this exercise, and the way that my brain works is, and I call it the mixed martial arts method, right? I'll hear something from somebody over here. I'll hear something from you. I'll hear something from one of my good friends, and I'll pick all these pieces together and I'll develop that into my own little system, right? So I'm hearing all this stuff. I learned something. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm going to put together this little exercise. I'm going to run myself through it. And I wrote a blog on this. And I think I did a podcast on this like 3 years ago, probably.
Okay.
And I call it the stoplight game.
Oh.
Right. So brain dump, grab a pen and paper. Okay. Or, grab your iPhone. If you're using an Android, I'm sorry, they're defective. Okay.
I think I'm my iPhone, don't worry.
Right. So if you whether you want to use your device, your computer, I don't care, but I need you to brain dump. List out every single person that is in your circle right now. Friends, family, colleagues, coworkers, kids, all of it. And just write down the list. I don't care if it's in order or not. Just write down everyone's name that you could possibly think of. And most of us could easily probably drop down 50 names. Mm-hmm. Right? Easily. From there, play the stoplight game. Right? And you got to ask yourself, go down the list of each person. Is this person 50% negative or more? Mm-hmm. Is this person 50% positive or more? Or is this person in between? So you see where we're going with the stoplight game. Yeah. If you're 50%, when you interact with them, let's say 10 times over the course of a week, if they're negative 5 times or more, you're going to put a red light or mark it red, color it red, whatever the fuck you want to do. Right? Dead. If they're in the middle, they're yellow. And if they're mostly a positive individual, they're going to get a green. And now the hard part comes, right? You start looking down the list of those reds and those red lights. You need to stop interacting with those people, affect them immediately. Right? Yep. And when I did it for the first time, I couldn't, it shocked me, some of the names that I saw on that red list. Yeah. And I was like, God, this is going to suck. And I got very intentional about either eliminating those people from my life, very intentional, or limiting time spent with those people. Yeah. Right. And by doing so, a couple of things happened. Your circle does get smaller. We call it the drop off. Right. And as you continue to elevate, self-develop, do better in business and life, it's going to happen naturally anyway.
It does.
Yep. The people who are around you who have stopped self-developing, who haven't done shit for themselves, are going to look at you and say, you're cocky. Yep. And it's not cockiness, it's confidence. And there's a very big difference. Mm-hmm. And it takes someone with confidence to recognize confidence in another person, in my opinion. Yeah. Yeah. So this is just some stuff that I've been able to do that I help a lot of my clients go through as well, is, hey, go through this exercise. Is going to suck. It's not going to be fun. I promise you. But if you do this hard work here and you start to intentionally limit and or cut some of these people out of your lives, like, a lot of your shit's going to get better. Your support system is going to get better. The people who you rely on are going to get better. And that's just a harsh truth, but it's not an easy one to do. Yeah. I love that. The green light, yellow light, right? I mean, I have clients now who feel like, hey, so let's sit down and this is impacting you more than you realize. Oh, sure. Yeah. It's so simple to do. And like, that's the other thing too. Like, everyone wants to overcomplicate the crap and everything. Like, oh, I don't know which person I should get in my life. And like, I don't know, should I keep talking to this one? Should I keep this person on my team? Okay. Well, a couple things. Do you have core values defined for yourself and your business? If not, start there. And secondly, go play the stoplight game. And if you can't make good decisions based off of those two exercises that you've done, then you're beyond my help.
Yeah. And it's also, we're talking about the stoplight game. It's also, who do you draw closer?
Yeah.
Right? Who can you know what I mean? Like, who can you trust more in this? Like, who is the more positive person? Who is going to help you think through things, right? And I tell people, I was like, sometimes if you step back from some of the negativity, it opens the door for a different relationship to grow, right?
It does. Yeah. Like Jim Collins, the famous quote from his book, you got to get rid of the good to make room for the great.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the hardest thing to do because good is equal to average, right? Average is equidistant from exceptional to poor. It's flat in the middle. And average is where most of us just are comfortable, right? I fall victim to that shit often. I just do. It's just fact, right? But one of my personal core values is I refuse to be average. And oftentimes it takes me a little bit of a swift kick in the ass, either from myself or from someone who's on that close inner circle to say, hey, you're dropping off here and this is not how you operate. I know that for a fact. And that's when we have to either say, okay, cool, I'm a fraud. I'm going to continue living out of alignment with these core values, or you go and you make the hard choices and make the shift.
Yes. And for so many people too, it's realizing, and some people don't realize that they're worth that exceptional behavior, right? They're worth those exceptional relationships. They're worth that exceptional life, and if the discipline gets you there, the relationships get you there, the work gets you there. Yeah.
I've it's funny, everyone sees me like, oh, you're this big giant human and you come across confident and all this and whatnot, the other, and I'll be the first one to tell you, like, I haven't been this way my whole life. Okay, I was always the quiet kid growing up in school, and for the most part I wore glasses, had fucked up teeth, and people made fun of me.
Yeah,
right.
I heard you say that.
I was always I shopped in the husky section because I was always a big kid.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I dealt with all this crap growing up, and I've transitioned into a different human as I've gotten older. And the only way that I've been able to transition is through doing the work. And by doing the work on yourself in your business and continuously doing it day in and day out, it builds the confidence muscle.
Yep.
Right. So without that, I'd still be, let's call it adolescence Tom, who was, getting made fun of and just not happy.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. And a lot of people aren't willing to address it, deal with it, or do the work to overcome it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. So let's talk a little bit more about PR. Let's talk about clients. Let's talk about who is the ideal client that you like to work with that fits the way that you operate inside your company.
Sure. So I want people who have, we help amplify messages, right? That's our whole job is to help you amplify your business, your message, your connections. And so I want to work with people who have it sounds corny, but a good heart, right? And so some of the businesses we work with are some of the people that we work with, not necessarily is it in their actual business message. Sometimes it's behind the scenes, right? Sometimes it's an entrepreneur or a business, right? That just kind of like doing the car installations, right? It's like, it's great, but like, I say, is it doing good in the world? Yeah, that's great, whatever. But behind the scenes, right, they're like, hey, I'm donating tons of money to X, Y, and Z, right? So I don't necessarily need you to be out front with that, but I need you to be aligned with the fact that we all need to be doing good in this world, and what are we doing for it, right? Typically, most of my clients have a small group of people working for them, 3 to 10 employees, and they're able to spend the kind of money they need to spend, to be able to make the connections they need to make, whether that's podcasts, whether that's TV, whether that's newspapers. So yeah.
What's your favorite media channel or outlet to get your clients' placements in, and why?
Oh, I think it was severely underrated. It's not as underrated as it used to be, but YouTube shows. So one of my favorite to people on is Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu. Like I love that show. And, I've had clients before who gave me pushback on it years ago, right? Years ago, they would give me pushback on it and they would say, oh no, it's too, it's not big enough for me, or it's not this for me, but just go, just do it. It's worth it. Right. And now, 3, 4, 5 years later, I see clips of them, because now Impact Theory is so big. I see clips of them on Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok of the interview with Tom, right? And it's being repurposed and reclipped like 5 years later. People don't understand like there's this video and audio component, and it's brilliant, right?
Yeah.
And so the same with like Cheddar TV. Like people are like, it depends on your ideal client, right? Like Cheddar TV, the streaming show, and they do business. They target the millennial gap, right? And so when people don't understand, they're like, what is it? I'm like, okay, if this is your ideal, it's really whatever your ideal client is. If your ideal client is reading, watching, and listening to this, that's where you need to be. Yeah. You know, I do love YouTube shows, but I also don't care, because if I get you on a show and your ideal client isn't reading, won't recognize the banner on your website, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't make a difference. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the underlying tone that I'm picking up on here, and by the way, for those listening to the show, this is Marketing 101, is fish where the fish are.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
You got to figure out where your leads, clients, prospects, whatever term you want to call them, you got to understand where they're going to be hanging out. And that's the medium you got to go after.
I talked to this guy one time. He was a client of mine, and I was talking to him, and I just said, "Hey, like, how come you decided to work with this business? You know, with tech, because anyway, the prices were not cheap." And I said, "Well, what made you decide?" And he said, I knew it was a lot of money, but I went to the website and he said, I saw it was some little local TV show she had done, like just this little TV. And he said, and I saw that XYZ, show on her website. And I knew that if they had interviewed her, like, that she was credible, that she was worthy, right? Like this is the person this is the business I needed to be working with for what I needed. And I was like, yes, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're always shooting for, right?
Yeah, I like it. All right, so what's next? What are you trying to accomplish? Like, how many people are you trying to impact with this company of yours?
I can personally, only impact so many, and that's the whole thing about what I do, right? There's only so many podcasts I can do, only so many shows I can do, right? But if I can help other people amplify their messages and they're doing good in the world, then it just grows exponentially. And so that's always what I want to do. Yeah. So I don't know that I have a cap, but I'm going to go until I go.
Yeah. All right. So let's ask you some more personal questions.
Sure.
To me, business is a tool to basically give you the means necessary to go build the personal life that you want.
Yeah.
Okay. With that being said, what's the ideal day? What's the ideal week? What's the ideal year look like for you on the personal front if business is humming along at 100% and it's just kicking out ducats? And I'm talking about like coins and tokens, aka money, dollar bills, right? So your business is there, it's doing its thing. You got people working for you. You're producing things to your clients. Your clients are happy. Everything's moving along, and it's a perfect world. That's going to produce income for you, and it's going to allow you to go and do other things on the personal side that interest you. What are those personal things? What have you accomplished? Where are you in the world? Who are you with?
Yeah, it's great. So I am single and I don't actually have children. So it's interesting to be an entrepreneur, to be the age that I am, where I'm 41, and to not have those things. And so my friends are my family, and they are very important to me. And so for me, it's important that when my friends, a little boy says, I had a soccer game, that I can take off and go to his soccer game in the middle of the day, right? And to see him play. Travel is very important to me. And so I always want to be, especially, sometimes I'm going for business, right? But if I could tack on an extra couple of days to be able to hang out, I love Europe. I love, obviously, the Caribbean. Like, there's places in Africa I have not been, but want to go, right? And so that, to me, allows me to dig up so much creativity, and it's fun, and to see other cultures and how other people live. I volunteer a lot with the church, with the youth group, and even with the 12 to 18, and then I also volunteer with the 18 to college age, 18 to 28-ish year old kids. Sure. Having time to do that is very important to me. Last year, my nephew and his wife had a baby, and so being able to just pick up when he called and said, she's giving birth, be able to pick up and fly out 2 days later, right? That's the kind of stuff that's really important to me.
Yeah, see, that right there is the freedom that most people get into small business for.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, hey, cool. It's part of the American dream. I get to build this company, and I get to go and make decisions and do shit when I feel like it. Awesome. It's cool. The problem I see, and it's awesome that you have that ability right now. So you've done some cool shit in your life and business to make it a reality. The problem that I see is a lot of people start that small business with that intention. They tell themselves, I want the freedom. I want the freedom. I want the freedom. I don't care about the money. I just want the freedom. Okay, cool. Right. And they're tied together, by the way, for those of you who haven't realized that yet.
Yeah.
Okay. They want the freedom. They want the freedom. They want the freedom. And then they go and they skip over some of the foundational steps of building a business, aka implementing core values, mission, purpose, that kind of shit, right? Because it's woo-woo crap. We don't have time for that. This is a small business, not big corporate America. They start this business. They put together some kind of offer, whether it's service, whether it's them doing some manual labor for somebody. They land a couple of sales, and all of a sudden they're stuck in the fucking rat race, and they wind up painting themselves into a corner. And they get themselves into this corner where if they don't show up each and every day, their business does not function. And at that point in time, where's the freedom? The freedom's you can't even close your eyes and visualize the freedom at that point because you're so deep in the shit.
Yep.
Right.
You know what happened to me?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So my nephew had his baby last year. The year before that, he got married, and I missed his wedding. And he begged and begged and begged me to come and had me in it. And I missed it at the last minute, partly because I got sick, but partly because business was so overwhelming. And someone on my team came to me and they said, Sarah, if you don't start letting go of things, you can't. And it was someone I highly value, highly respect. And they were like, say, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And they had the courage to come to me and have a heart to heart. And it's not that I don't fall into that still, right? Because I'm still growing. It's not that I don't fall into that from time to time, but I try to keep people around me who say, hey, Sarah, this is remember what's your core values. Remember what's important to you. Are you actually aligned with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me step back and let go. Right.
Yeah. That's super important there. And man, I got a story to tell you here. Right. This is core values. The core values also apply to the fucking owner and founder of the family, of the company, by the way. That person is not exempt from operating within the structure of the values. Okay, now with that being said, I went out and spoke in Salt Lake City last August at an event, and there was a woman in the crowd. And it's funny, I walk into the event. I like to show up fashionably late, it's just my style. Okay, I show up like 10 minutes, 15 minutes after this event kicks off. I walk in, there's one seat left in the room. Well, I know where I'm sitting, right? Okay. And this is how God, the universe, whatever you believe in, is going to work on your behalf. So I sit down at this seat throughout the day, and I went up speaking at like 3 p.m. that day or something. So I've got the entire day of sitting in the seat as an attendee of this event, and have lunch and sit next to this woman and have conversations with her. Successful business owner and owns a massive dog training company. Cool. I like dogs. So we're talking about stuff and this, that, the other thing. I go up there, I do my thing, I speak for an hour or so. I tell a lot of my story. I tell a lot about how core values have positively impacted me in the business and some of the decisions I've made over the years. And I get back here to Dallas, and a couple of days later, she reaches out to me on Facebook and says, hey, I just bought your book and read it. And I enjoyed your talk at the event, and I enjoyed speaking with you as you sat next to me the whole day and whatnot. And she goes, I've got a lot of cool stuff dialed into my business. I've got a big team of people who work for me. She goes, but we're missing one key component. And you touched on it when you talked. Well, what is it? She's like, we don't have core values. Oh, okay. So she's like, I want to hire you specifically to help me and my executive team get clarity on those values and then also implement the values to the company. Cool. I'll do that with you. So put a package together, sent her an invoice, said, this is what it is. And basically we worked together for 90 days in order to get this thing kicking from start to finish. And second or third, and she would come to these calls with her executive team on the Zoom. So I'd have like 5 or 6 women on these calls, and we'd be diving in and going over things. And I'd be giving them homework to do. And they took it and they ran with it very quickly. It was cool to watch.
Yeah.
So like 3 or 4 weeks into this, she hits me up and we're having a private Zoom call, just me and her. And I said, hey, I gotta warn you about something that's going to happen. She's like, okay, cool. What's up? I was like, you guys got the core values lined out now, and we got to finalize them. We got to send off and get some graphic design work done. And Then we got a plan when we're going to roll these out to the actual company. You've got close to 50 people working for you right now. And one of the things that's going to happen is that you're going to start holding people accountable to these values, and you're going to have attrition within your company. Someone's going to quit, or someone's going to, cause ruckus, and you're going to have to fire them. Like, just be prepared for it. She's like, okay, cool, no problem. Going on a couple weeks. Everything's hunky-dory, right? And then it smacked her in the face as hard as it was like a left hook from Mike Tyson. Okay.
Wow.
And she calls me up and she's like, I can't believe this just happened. She blah, 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 and they're going back and forth. And she's like, my chief operations officer just resigned. I was like, what? This is a woman who's on the executive team who helped us craft the core values.
Jeez.
So what wound up happening was, cool, the values are in place, and now they're rolled out, they're implemented company-wide, and her team is now holding everyone who's on the team accountable to operating within these values, including her right-hand person. And her right-hand person thought that she was above the values, and figured, I just don't have to operate within these. And they started going head-to-head, and finally, the right-hand person said, you know what? I actually haven't been happy here in many years. So fuck you, I'm leaving.
Wow.
So as tough as that situation was, doing the work, they actually did the work.
Yep.
It was necessary. That's another version right there of getting rid of the good, making room for the great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. This has been awesome. What's the best place we can connect with you, learn more about you, your personal journey, and as of course, some of the PR stuff you're doing?
Yeah. So for business, it's eliteconnectionmarketing.com. You can email Sarah, SAREH, or hello@eliteconnectionmarketing.com. Yep. And then for my personal journey, it's actually SarahRuthSnyder.com. So yeah, I'm always happy to talk business. I'm always happy to talk personal. I'm always happy to connect. I love connecting with people. So yeah.
I love it. I appreciate your time here today. You got an awesome story, and I wish you nothing but success in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Sons.
Thank you for tuning in to the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast. Make sure you head over to stepitupentrepreneur.com and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast.